Hi, Kris from Action Drone here. I'm going to show you now how to prepare the AD2 for flight out of the box. And pull it straight up. From here, you have a sense of the drone. You see the box where it has the bolts and nuts, put it in the back. At this point, we want to open up the arms and do the mounting of the propellers. Extend each arm out. And next we have to lock each arm. So underneath we have a thumb screw, our wing nut, and just turn them until hand tighten. And that's for each arm fully extended. And next up, propellers. From the bottom of the box, we're going to lay out all 8 propellers. So we have here our carbon fiber propellers. You can see there's differences on both sides as well as the edges. The top is always with the writing, the bottom no writing. Top, so this would be the top of the propeller. And each propeller has a specific orientation. From looking at the propeller, you can see one edge is different from the other edge. Basically, this would be the top of the propeller with the leading edge and the trailing edge. From there, you can figure out the orientation of the propeller by spinning it. So if this is the leading edge and this is the trailing edge, the propeller is going to spin this way. Thus, we have the proper propeller orientation, which is going to be very important because on each of these 8 motors, we have specific orientation. This is counterclockwise, these would be for clockwise. 8 in total. So right now I am going to install and mount the first propeller on this motors. But if we look at the motors, they have to match the orientation of the propeller. The motors specifically on the drone, if you identify just the 4 arms, this would be the nose of the craft, the tail of the craft. The 2 forward motors would spin in orientation of the top motors, because you can see there's a top and there's a bottom. The 2 top motors spin inward towards the craft. This would obviously spin counterclockwise. This would spin clockwise. Basically, as they spin, they should give the drone a hug from the front. And that's the reverse for the back. These 2 back motors spin into the drone, into the tail. So this one would spin in a clockwise orientation. This motor would spin into a counterclockwise orientation. And from there you can figure out the orientation of the propeller. And just a quick note, whatever orientation is the top would be the opposite orientation on the bottom. So what is, we can actually distinguish counterclockwise propellers and clockwise propellers. I'm going to grab this propeller and right away distinguish that it is a counterclockwise orientation, knowing that this is the top of the propeller, this is the bottom. We know this is the leading edge and the trailing edge, and from there we know that it's going to spin and is meant to spin in a counterclockwise orientation. This motor is meant to spin in a counterclockwise orientation because I know it's the front of the craft and it wants to turn into the nose. So the way that it goes is that the propeller goes on top of the motor, lined up with the hole, and you basically sandwich it with a mounting plate. So what it is, we line up the holes. Remember, the plate has to go on top of the propeller, very important. And from there, you can use the screws that's provided. So what we are going to do now is describe motor propeller orientation, specifically using the board. I will draw the craft from above. You can tell that would be the nose. So I will identify the motors. We have motor 1, motor 2, motor 3, and motor 4. And this is looking from above. In the X8 configuration, there's a motor on the top and motor on the bottom. So the motor under the bottom for number 2 would be motor 5, motor 6, motor 7, and motor 8. So we know now the numbering of the motors, but each motor spins specifically. Like I said earlier, the motor spins for the front into the craft. So motor 1 would spin counterclockwise. Motor 2 spin clockwise into the craft. And the same goes for motors 4 and motors 3. Motors 4 would spin into the tail of the craft. Motor 3 would spin into the tail. If you can figure out this orientation, you can easily figure out the orientation of the motors for the bottom because they're completely opposite. One obviously would spin in the other direction. Nope, there we go. Motor 5, opposite direction. Motor 8, opposite direction. Motor 7, opposite direction. Knowing this orientation, you can match it with the drone when you assemble and mount the props. I'm going to now mount all the motors with respectively to the top motors. So I know that this propeller is meant for a clockwise orientation because this is the top, that's the bottom. Top always has writing, leading edge, trailing edge. As you spin it, it's spinning clockwise. This motor is meant to spin clockwise because it is the top and it is on the left and it turns into the nose. So. And very important to remember that when you're mounting the propellers, you have the plate, the propeller, and the motor. Remember, the plate is supposed to make a sandwich between the motor. If you get this reversed, you have the potential to crack the propeller, and the propeller can come apart in midair, and you would have a crash. So this motor, I know, is for a clockwise orientation. This is the tail, and this propeller matches it because top, bottom, leading edge, trailing edge, clockwise orientation. And just to make note, the brass fittings should be in between each motor and propellers. Sometimes it comes off. We will include it. Kris here again. I will now show you how to mount the bottom propellers. So what it is, I will take the drone and flip it and have our lovely assistant Carlo hold it. So I pick it up, we invert it, and now he's going to hold it. Like I was saying before on the board, that the propeller will act, the motor and propeller would act opposite from each other. So if this top motor and propeller is spinning in this direction, I know that this motor will spin in this orientation. But you have to be very careful that you mount the propellers in the same top, bottom, bottom. So if you know this is the bottom of the propeller because we are on the bottom of the craft, I need to make sure I need to install it on the bottom. So if this propeller is spinning in this direction, I will have to install the propeller that spins in the opposite direction. So you can tell that this is the bottom, this is the bottom, this is the trailing, this is the leading, and it's going to spin in the opposite direction. What we did was remove the drone from the case, extended the arms, mounted the props to the respective motors, and now at this point we can begin the pre-flight checklist, starting from the very end, working our way to the middle. We just want to confirm that all motors have the correct propellers mounted, top, the top are mounted correctly, and that's for all the motors, all propellers, and each one is paired in opposite directions. We know that this motor specifically is going to spin counterclockwise with the propeller, and down below it will spin opposite direction, so the propeller should match. Then you should also take a look at the way that the propeller is mounted to the motor. Here you can see the motor mounting plate a little bit loose. They all need to be hand tightened. So what it is, I will tighten them. And at this point you can start eyeballing them for the other 6 motors. No spaces, no gaps, everything is flush and sandwiched. And that's all good for all the motors. After I confirmed the motors, the propellers, the mounting, I also want to confirm with free spin. If all the motors are free spinning, if no obstructions within it, all of them feel loose and neutral. Loose and neutral, no obstructions within the motor itself. The next thing to look at is to see if the tightenings of the arms, I can tell already there's a little bit giveaway, so give a little tighten here, a little tighten here, back here. Oh, there we go. It's tight. I saw this one's loose. I could tighten this one as well. Now I have them snug and tight. We have pretty much everything set. The next up will be the battery mounting, and almost ready there for flight. Kris here from Action Drone again. I'm just going to show you how to mount the battery tray with the batteries onto our blue AD2. So first, this would be the top of the battery plate. This will be the bottom. It's all flush and smooth. So we mount it under the belly. If I could show you, just like that. And you just have to follow the bolts and nuts so they fit and flush into these parts here. So I'm actually going to invert it for the mounting process. So this would be the front of the battery tray. This would be the back. You want to get the batteries as close as possible and flush with the front. And have them pointing at each other. And the way you want to mount the batteries is have the rough side on the top of the battery, so that it mounts like that. Okay. Just going to invert it again just for mounting purposes. Okay. So the bottom, this will be the top. And this just like that. Right there. Now I have the battery strapped to the plate. That was I'm going to insert it on the belly, lining up all the bolts. So I'll get down low and see it. And you should hear a click when you hear this click. There you go. Just want to confirm. Take a good look. Solid, 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 solid. Sturdy and safe. To finish off, just as for securing purposes, a zip tie. There you go. That's nicely fastened. And then you can see on the other side, you have the battery cable connectors here, and then when you're ready to fly, you just connect them here, just like that. All right. I just want to do a couple of the pre-flight procedures as we prep the drone for flight. Starting from our out to in, we'll work with the props to make sure we have the correct orientation, correct spin, everything is facing up, everything is up with the righting. Next we'll check if the mounting is smooth and flush with the motor. No spaces, no gaps, everything seems to be there, nothing is loose. Next we want to check if free spin for all 8 motors, nothing obstructing. And then we check the motor mounts if loose. And then we'll move to the arms if they're locked. It's tight, tight, there you go. Alright, we just did the battery, firm and secure. Legs, there, gimbal, loose and free. Now we move on to pre-flight checklist.
It's Adrian. So here's your radio. You got your normal stick movements with throttle, which is your left stick moving up and down. Your yaw, which is your left stick moving left or right. Then you pitch, which is the right stick moving up or down. And then you got your roll, which is left or right. And then you got your flight modes, which is this white switch right here. The top one is your altitude hold. Your middle one is loiter. And all the way down is auto, which will follow a flight path. And next you got your red switch, which is your failsafe. All the way back is failsafe, which is return to launch.
Hello, Carlo here. I'm the co-pilot for Adrian. My purpose is to make sure, it's another double check to make sure that everything's on here correctly, the propellers spin the right way, and that you're good to go with your battery. I also verify with my pilot how far to go for taking off. Since safety is important, you have to be a certain distance away from where the ground station is. And then he'll also tell you when to plug in. You won't do it on your own. You're going to wait for the pilot's command. When you hear that, you just plug in your XT60s. Before that though, you also have to make sure that the drone's facing the wind. The drone is now plugged in. Right now the beeps you hear are the heartbeats from the motors and the ESCs, which is normal. That noise at 3 chimes right there, that means it acquired satellites and you are ready for arming. When your main pilot says arm, you press and hold this button, and now you vacate the area, and now the drone is ready to fly.
After your co-pilot arms the drone, you want to make sure that the area is clear, and when the area is clear, to arm the drone, which is make the motor start spinning, you want to get your throttle stick, move it all the way to the right and hold it there so that the motor starts spinning. After that, you want to slowly throttle up to launch your drone. When you want to land, get to loiter mode, which is the middle switch. Make sure your throttle is around 50% and slowly bring it down. And when you are about 5 to 7 meters above the ground, you want to flip this switch here all the way up and the drone will automatically land by itself.